Welcome to the Rare Books Department of the J. Willard Marriott Library at the University of Utah. The Rare Books Department is one of 5 departments within the Special Collections Division. Other departments include manuscripts, photo archives, audiovisual, and print and journal. Special Collections materials are held on the 4th floor of the Marriott Library and can be accessed by request in the Special Collections Reading and Reference Room. The Rare Books Department holds more than 80,000 items, including books, maps, ephemera, and realia, documenting the record of human communication, from Sumerian clay tablets to 21st century artist books. By actively collecting and digitizing material of historical and aesthetic importance, the Rare Books Department preserves a heritage of thought, artistic endeavor, and innovation that inspires the human spirit today. We provide reference, research, and educational access to local, regional, and international communities, strengthening the ability of faculty to teach, students to learn, and communities to find common denominators. The philosophy behind the Rare Books Department has long emphasized the importance of the book as a physical object, and some of our most meaningful interactions with our collections have occurred in the classroom, where students are able to hold history in their hands. Unfortunately, we cannot meet in the classroom at this time, but what I can do is share some digital resources for you that will help regardless of what you're studying. Russian artist L. Lissitzky considered himself a book architect. He liked to experiment with the construction of the page, the scaffolding of language, the use of type, furniture, rules, bars, and bullets. For him, the pages of a book were empty rooms to build out and furnish, and inside these 4 walls he saw a limitless space across various axes. Lissitzky had a certain philosophy when it came to book construction. He wanted to introduce the book to the reader as a dynamic object, where ideas are given form through letters, thus creating a direct path to the brain through the eye rather than the ear. In this channel, Lissitzky said, the waves rush with much greater speed and pressure than the acoustic channel. One can speak out only through the mouth, but the book's facilities for expression take many more forms. Lissitzky was part of the Russian avant-garde, who saw beauty in industry, technology, mass production, and repetition. In the burgeoning Soviet Union, the avant-garde worked together to provide society with new perspectives by breaking the physical, visual, cultural, and aesthetic orthodoxies which had governed the old way of life. Collaboration was also an important process for the Russian avant-garde, and through the collective of artists, Lissitzky and Vladimir Mayakovsky met. Mayakovsky, with his loud and booming voice, is considered to be one of the most prominent figures of the Russian futurist movement. During his career, he produced a body of work as large as his personality. He wrote poems, directed plays, appeared in films, edited art journals, all while avidly supporting the ideology of the Communist Party during the Russian Civil War. For Mayakovsky, it was important that his poems be read aloud, and as such, Lissitzky responded with the construction of Для голоса, or For the Voice. For the Voice is one of the most innovative works of the early 20th century. It consists of 13 poems, 13 being a number of superstition, an uneven number that reveals the futurist love for dissymmetry as well as for chaos and taboo. Disorder was celebrated, thus ridding the necessity for page numbers or linear order. Instead, a reader could simply thumb the index and start from anywhere in the book. As Mayakovsky intended, the books were meant to be read aloud, or, more accurately, shouted, trumpeted, belched forth in public squares. Lissitzky's attention to typographic details amplified Mayakovsky's verses through his inclusion of color, size, and weight. This visual stimulation was meant to agitate emotion, and thus corresponded directly to the ideological rhetoric of the poems. In the early 20th century, the avant-garde experimented heavily with the concept of concrete poetry. are poems created in arrangement of linguistic elements in which the typographical effect is more important in conveying meaning than verbal significance. In addition to being read, these poems perform in accordance to their layout on the page, forcing the reader to navigate the typography like a map and engage the text as a landscape of language. David Arnold's chain of letters locates itself in this visual poetic tradition, establishing a landscape of language on a richly textured black page. From this negative space, white shapes emerge, and with them a chaotic arrangement of letter forms and images, all of which lead the reader spiraling into a black hole of chain letters and conspiracy theories. Prior to the internet and social media, chain letters were initially written or printed and then exchanged hand to hand or through the mail. The letters attempted to convince people that unless they created copies and passed them along to a certain number of individuals, bad things would happen, potentially even death. The content of the letters often includes examples of those who obeyed and were rewarded, and those who disobeyed and suffered greatly. Arnold was fascinated by the concept of chain letters, but the prospects of having new work published, especially experimental poetry, was simply not possible through conventional means. In response, Arnold decided to create his own small publishing company and was joined by two close friends, Keith Sheen and Ted Pearson. Together, the three men formed Trike, which allowed them to publish their first books and later the works of other writers. In addition to Trike, they created BookRate, a small mail-order catalog and distribution company that helped distribute the works of other small and medium-sized publishing companies. In total, Trike would publish about 15 titles, including Arnold's second book, Situations, published in 1983. To produce the book, Arnold used a variety of techniques and materials, including typesetting and xerography, plus stencils, press-on letters, and newspaper photographs, which were cut and reassembled. Chain of Letters was printed in an edition of 1,000 copies. 26 copies are lettered A through Z and signed by the author. The resulting work shows us just how far the space within the four walls of a page can take us. In terms of architecture, scaffolding is a structure used to support the work crew and other materials in order to aid in the construction, maintenance, and repair of buildings. If we apply this to the architecture of the book, we might think of scaffolding as the structure which supports how meaning is conveyed, especially when a book lacks text. Visual scaffolding allows us to read when no language is present. Artist Ellen Banks is known for her geometric abstract paintings, which is inspired by musical notation. To indicate how the concept works, we look to her work Maple Leaf Rag, published in 1988. The musical notes on the staff are translated onto the page as colored squares on a grid. An A note is red, an E note is blue, and a half note fills half a square, making a triangle. Banks's translation of Scott Joplin's piano score thus acts as a visual scaffolding onto which notes and tones are assigned specific colors and densities, visualizing sound in shape and embodying musical tone and hue. The rag was an experimental style of music made popular in the 1890s by Midwestern Black musicians. It blended march tempos with syncopated or ragged rhythms. Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag, named after a social club in Missouri, became the style's greatest hit, sparking a nationwide ragtime craze. Hundreds of rags were being published, and by 1905, the phenomenon even reached the White House, at the request of President Theodore Roosevelt's daughter. The first extant recording of the Maple Leaf Rag was played in 1906 by the United States Marine Band. Born in Boston, Ellen Banks credited the work of Piet Mondrian as one of her earliest influences. She received her bachelor's degree from Massachusetts College of Art. Her first solo exhibition took place in 1962, and 5 years later she received the Prix de Paris. Her work is in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Museum of Fine Art in Boston, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the National Center of Afro-American Artists. We typically understand the page of a book to be flat and two-dimensional, and when we read, our eyes simply skim over the surface, never noticing the depth and texture of the words. But if we think of the page as an empty room, then all elements of design, from font to color and even spacing, might be realized as decor, furnishing the space, each with its own material qualities. Artist and historian Johanna Drucker has been calling attention to visual materiality for more than 3 decades, both in her academic writing and her very own artist books. For Drucker, the material fact of the work being physically present is inscribed as a corporeal entity, or more distinctly, the Word made flesh. The Word made flesh is Drucker's ode to the materiality of text. Published in 1989, the book is meant to trip the eye and constantly return the reader to the plane of discourse, of material production. The writing, once perceived, continually refers to the visceral character of language, as seen in passages such as, "The tongue lies on the table, writing, writhing, spelling out the breath of its efforts in an unseemly desire to be seen." And yet, the experimental typographic forms seem to upstage the very message they are supposed to support. Drucker has decorated her blank white walls with letters, but then again, it isn't just mere decor. Letters and symbols are invested with power, and through their arrangement, whether on a piece of paper or an electronic screen, they have the ability to influence things like politics, economy, and culture all across the world. So far, we have seen ways in which experimental typography transforms the space of the page, but the structure of the book itself can be manipulated to embody an environment, such as a dark alley or street. Designed by Claire Van Vliet, the founder of the Janus Press and quite literally a book architect, Night Street tells the story of a young woman in the city who was faced with the dilemma of retaining her humanity without becoming a victim. The narrative is revealed through a series of 10 poems written by Barbara Luck. Simultaneously, the narrative also moves through a cityscape created by the accordion-style book. Van Vliet describes how the book needed to be tall and threatening, even ugly, to evoke dark alleys on the one side. On the other side, the reading side, it needed to have the glitter and vitality that draws so many to the city. The leaves are tall and narrow and shaped to form a skyline of tall buildings. In addition, the intricate collage-like structure of cutouts and paste-downs in various papers and shapes depict the complexity of the city when all the pages are extended out. To read this book is to travel through its environment. To travel through one of Walter Hamony's books is to get lost and never know where you're going. But that's all part of the fun. Hamony was the originator and proprietor of one of the most innovative private presses in the United States. At its founding in 1964, Hamony chose the name Perishable Press Limited because, as he explained, it reflects the human condition, which is both perishable and limited. The Perishable Press Limited has printed hundreds of titles, but some of the most extraordinary are Hamony's own series, which he called the Interminable Gabberjabs. From 1973 to 2006, Hamony published a total of 8 Gabberjabs. The books make use of the same satirical surrealist strategies of the past, such as free association, found imagery, and the radical juxtaposition of advertising ephemera. Likewise, Hamidi makes fun of the seriousness of the art world and the traditional notions about the structure and function of books. In 1996, Hamidi came out with his seventh Gabberjab. It was called Traveling, or Neo-Postmodern Premortism, or Dicer Rassen ist kein Handelko, or Interminable Gabberjab Number 7. The German part of the title was taken from a street sign Hamidi saw in a railway station, which roughly translates to, "This grass is not a toilet for your dog." The title and the book itself are reflections of Hamidi's pronouncement of art as shit, in which he contends that his letterpress concoctions are not merely about printing, but about the arrangement of things in a given space, stretching and pushing expectations, limits, and buttons, finding the extraordinary in the prosaic ordinary, and baking bread out of shit but making it taste good. The book is full of deliberate nonsense, unabashed mischief, and scatological humor which becomes highlighted in its design. Published in an edition of 125 copies, no two books are alike. They have been printed, collaged, rubber-stamped, drilled, notched, pigment-patterned, punched, numbered, signed, grommeted, scribed, ear-tattooed, drawn, camouflaged, or time-clocked. As a material item, the work perfectly exemplifies Max Ernst's well-known definition of collage as the exploitation of the chance meeting on a non-suitable plane of two mutually distant realities. And as for Hamidi, all of life is a collage. Walter Hamidi believed that the book is the Trojan horse of art, because the book is not feared by average people. It is a familiar form in the world. Even more so, our familiarity with the text block renders its conventions almost invisible. But what if we were to deconstruct the text block, to open it up and display the blueprint of the paragraph, complete with its corridors and rooms and all the spaces in which meaning can be stored? What the ambulance driver said is a run-on sentence which poses as a short story. The reader first approaches the story as a single paragraph, but then the language itself takes up space. It extends across the page, onto another page, and yet another page, folding out in full to 26 inches. To quote Johanna Drucker, "The finitude of a page is illusory. The physical space limits are measurable and according to a fixed metric assured, but the associative field within the text creates endless opportunities for branching or breaking the line, to follow lines of thought, breaching the code of compositional conduct." For Drucker, it was important that the static page was understood as dynamic. What the ambulance driver said was issued in an edition of 300 copies and acted as Granary Books' New Year's greeting in 1998. It included the message, "Live long and prosper." Philip Gallo of the Hermetic Press was responsible for the design and letterpress printing of the book. Established in 1965, the Hermetic Press was devoted to printing concrete and visual poetry. Many of these books are now in major collections, including the Museum of Modern Art and the Walker Art Center, among others. Gallo was also closely associated with the New York's Granary Books in their early years, and worked as their principal typographer and printer. The first words placed define the space. This is how Johanna Drucker begins her book, Diagrammatic Writing. So what if we take this concept and apply it to the very first words, and I mean the very first words from the very first architect? Bereshit bara Elohim et are the first 4 words of the Torah, and according to Rabbi Hamnuna Saba, they are out of order, in that the root Beth comes before the root Aleph in the Hebrew language. It is this story of letters which serves as an introduction to the fundamental book of Jewish mysticism, the Zohar. The Zohar is the supreme commentary of Jewish Kabbalah, with a network of treatises, texts, fragments of texts, all of which belong to different periods in history, but all resemble each other in their method of the mystical interpretation of the Torah. The first printed editions of the Zohar appear in the 16th century, but centuries later, the book continues to draw inspiration in and outside of Jewish society. For artist Joshua Reichert, the text of the Zohar acts as the foundation of his own interpretive work, otiot. The title, a Hebrew word which translates into sacred signs, directly addresses the Hebrew alphabet and its mystical power, as described in the first passage of the Zohar. These sacred signs are said to be the very same script found on the 2 stone tablets which were passed down to Moses. As symbols written by God's own hand, there exists a supernatural quality to each of the 22 characters. Not only does each character represent a numeral value, the otiot suggests that the name, function, and visual component of the character share equal importance. Joshua Reichert thus embodies this mentality through his artistic representation of the Hebrew alphabet. Although Reichert is considered to be one of Europe's most noted typographers, the character images in this text are based on the typeface Chaim, designed by the Polish designer and illustrator Jan Lewitt in 1929. Each of the 22 colorful serigraphs feature Lewitt's characters against a background of striking color patterns that provoke optical illusions. Opposing the letters are passages from the Zohar, edited by Reichert and translated from Aramaic to German by Heinz Baer. These short passages depict the creator selecting and making the case for the order of the alphabet, and subsequently, the order for which the world will be created. The first words placed define the space. Mainz was one of 3 important centers of Jewish theology and learning in Central Europe during the Middle Ages, and it is here where artist Peter Malutsky resides. Malutsky is also interested in the alphabetical order of letters, but more specifically with how it relates to the creation of encyclopedias. Encyclopedias attempt to summarize knowledge in relatively short articles. As well as providing basic overviews of topics and answers to simple facts, encyclopedias perform the function of providing context, in other words, identifying where the topic fits in the overall scheme of knowledge. Collage Book 1, or Collage Book 1, was influenced by Malutsky's previous work on the encyclopedia, and though the title might suggest otherwise, it was not meant to be a simple book of collages, but rather an attempt to exemplify and call into question the architecture of a book that is supposed to combine text and image. In Collage Book 1, Malutsky reverses the order of text and image. The textual message is conveyed by the rectangular shapes or text blocks printed in red. It starts with a simple rectangle on the first page. The shapes are then increasingly subdivided over the course of the book. On the opposing page, we see images, but these images are now made up of text and appear in and out of the frame of the green rectangle, which serves as their connection point. To create the collage, Malutsky used pages from old books, as well as red mold-made paper and proofing stickers from the 19th century. For the collages, original pages from the following books were used: The History of the Private Life of the French by Monsieur Legrand d'Aussy, Opera Omnia by Plato, Revelations about Russia, and Tiberius and the Legacy of Augustus. In the opening description of Arch, Kitty Marriott, Director Emeritus at Scripps College Press, writes, "Architecture, like books, is a delicate balancing act between stability and motion, interior and exterior, aesthetic values and structural practicalities. And books, like buildings, are fundamentally inhabited spaces. They are incomplete without human interaction. Books are inherently architectonic, so studying architecture would naturally be profitable to students building their own books." Arch was inspired in part by an article published in the LA Times on contemporary women architects, which highlighted a striking building by Jeannie Gang. Earlier in the year, the new president of Scripps College had chosen the genius of women as her inaugural theme. Kitty Marriott interpreted this as serendipity. She was to make a book about the genius of women architects. This book was built by 10 women paper architects. Their tools were knives and bone folders and 4 Vandercook printing presses. They blended 3 typefaces chosen for their affinity and distinctiveness: Garamond, Earhart, and Fournier. Heather paper from Europe was selected for its natural stone-like colors of oatmeal, sage, charcoal, and mahogany. It was also exactly the right stiffness for cutaways and pop-ups. The tops of the rising sections were hand-cut to suggest a natural landscape where built structures fit into their environment, which changes as you manipulate the book into different configurations. The reader moves from the outside to the inside, as if through openings. These accordion-folded sections were sewn together in pairs with linen thread. Arch was printed in an edition of 109 copies. Our rarebooks copy is number 21. Typo Builder Book is translated into the English as Typo Picture Book, but the play on words is rather amusing. From the onset, this book is deceiving. It is large and thick and appears hefty, but is surprisingly light. The text on the flyleaves is scrambled. The letters are in reverse and sometimes in the wrong order, deliberately, sometimes inverted. The uppercase aligned to drop below the line, the lowercase aligned to rise above the line. Translated, the text declares, appearance and reality. Since the invention of script and the printed word, we have lost access to pictorial statements. We have become character devout. Nonetheless, we still read images. However, when reading images, signs, and symbols, we seem to struggle, even though they also represent a source of information, with a simultaneous effect on various levels. Initially, our visual perception looks for symmetry and a human face. Using an arrangement of letters, symbols, dingbats, and more, Typo Builder Book wants us to play with our notion of books and of reading. To paraphrase Ellen Lupton, spacing, framing, punctuation, type, style, layout, and other non-phonetic marks of difference constitute the material interface of writing. But this page layout was deliberately not prepared. The design and sequence of the pages were intended to develop during the work process. The first printing forms were blue lines and linear frameworks at the bottom of the pages. New ideas developed during the unrolling and tearing off of the paper towels, as well as during composition, setup, printing, and removal of type. The book is rich in information about its material and making. Consider, for instance, Hani's description of the type area within which he worked, and separately, his samples of grid plans. The type area is 40,340 Cicero, or 18,318 centimeters, equals 4 squares comprising of 20,320 Cicero, 939 centimeters, each, or 400 squares comprising of 232 Cicero, 939 millimeters. The top margin is 3.5 centimeters, the bottom margin is 4.5 centimeters to the middle of the blue line. The outside margin is 1.5 centimeters, the inside margin is 3.5 centimeters, and then page layout was determined by the paper. Paper towels, maxi roll, composition, 100% oxygen bleached pulp, wet strength additives and agents. Roll length, 62.1 meters plus or minus 2%. Sheet size, 23 by 26 centimeters plus or minus 2%. Paper from responsible sources, approved by Forest Stewardship Council. Hani's descriptions of materials and dimensions almost reads like an architectural blueprint, and the fact of the matter is, the book truly was built first with raw materials: lead characters, synthetics and wood, brass lines and signs, typographic signs, and lead symbols. The pictures were then constructed from individual parts and printed on the hand-proofing press. Some of them were superimposed in several printing cycles. Lastly, the body of the book was bound by hand with thread. Total production or construction time, approximately 600 hours. While Typo Builder Book attempted to subvert our ideas of appearance and reality, this next book is quite literally about building stories. Building Stories is a 2012 graphic novel by American cartoonist Chris Ware. The intricate, multi-layered stories pivot around an unnamed female protagonist and mainly focuses on her time in a 3-story brownstone apartment building in Chicago. The unconventional work is made up of 14 printed pieces designed to be read in any order, although the back of the box includes a pictographic listing all 14 items with suggestions to assist the reader, who then builds and rebuilds the stories. Since the organizing principle of building stories is architecture, the book is also as much about buildings as it is about the people inside them. Ware renders both places and events as architectural diagrams with the certainty of every detail visualized diagonally to show how they fit together. Even the thoughts of the apartment building in which the story takes place are given notice and displayed as cursive lettering. The box into which all the items fit has been described to be the size of an atlas. This description has a number of implications, being that it is an atlas of a certain kind, of urban life, apartment life, and the ways in which people are connected, albeit temporarily. The reader has no choice but to also become connected, as they are forced to physically engage with the book in all of its components. In this way, Building Stories makes an impactful statement about what a book is and what a book can be, leaving all of the interpretive power to the reader. Even still, reading the full 260 pages of text is a slow, demanding, and melancholy task. But Ware has earned the right to make demands of his readers. He has built a whole microcosm in this one box over the course of more than a decade. Building Stories was assembled from pieces created for publications like Nest, The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Chicago Reader, and elsewhere. The completed work was published by Pantheon Books in 2012. The previous book was described as being the size of an atlas, which is itself a book of maps and charts. But to continue with the ongoing theme of this lecture, the book of space, landscape, environment, using an actual atlas would be low-hanging fruit, so let's try something a little different. Cartographic Fragmentations was published by Christopher Maddox in 2014. The collection of prints was developed as a supplement to another project of his called Terra Obscura. Maddox describes Terra Obscura as an ongoing response to the historical and political undertakings to tame and quantify the wild earth, and define borders in political and semiotic terms. The broader work is an interpretive reordering of cartography and information graphics, by which art retrieves space from science, and revitalizes the term terra incognita while altering its implications. Each print in this collection displays the complete color palette of a particular published map found in the archives of the Arthur H. Robinson Map Library at the University of Wisconsin. Colors were matched precisely and reproduced using a Pantone matching system conversion guide. By tampering with the physical organization of the map, Maddox challenges the authority of a fixed two-dimensional representation of a much more dynamic system. As such, there is also a confrontation with the discrepancy between appearance and reality, as we have seen before. With these maps, navigation, orientation, and reference are restructured in confusing and perhaps nonsensical ways, and that is precisely the point. As Maddox writes, Science claims to have acquired total knowledge of the physical surfaces of the world, and so the task for art is sometimes to demystify it in order to stimulate the inquisitive spirit. I hope by this point in the lecture you have come to realize that a book can be so much more than a stack of papers bound on one end and encased between covers. Inspired by the words of Ellen Knutson, I have sought to show you that books are architecture, books are environments, books are maps, books are plans, books are collections, and books are processes. This concept is the intent of Ellen Knutson's work, Ingress-Egress, created to encourage ideation on the theme, Books Are. The title alludes to the book as both an entry and exit point, with us, the readers, moving in between. Ingress-Egress is made up of 6 French fold structures printed on Japanese mulberry paper. The translucency of the paper produces layers of reading in each of the books, increasing the potential of interaction of layers among the entire collection. Using geometry, visual design, text, and imagery, each book explores topics such as books are architecture and books are environments, as made evident with the previous examples we have seen. Knutson's philosophy extends to all the work produced by her and the Crooked Letter Press, the imprint under which she works. As an artist and designer, Knutson emphasizes the visual environment in which the reader or viewer can be an active participant. Her choices of text, imagery, materials, and binding are synthesized in support of the environment of the final printed piece. But surely the book is now everything. It has become in our time what the cathedral with its frescoes and stained glass used to be, what the palaces and museums where people went to look and learn used to be. The book has become the monument of the present, but in contrast to the old monumental art, it itself goes to the people and does not stand like a cathedral in one place waiting for someone to approach. This is what L. Lissitzky said in an article published in 1919. More than 100 years later, I would argue his words continue to ring true. Yes, even in the digital age, libraries continue to be valuable repositories of real books that you can touch and feel and read and hold. All of the structural components of the book enhance meaning, and sometimes it requires taking a book apart just to see how complex the architecture is. Bianca Stone and Jenny Yoshida Park's collaborative work, The Color System, can be seen as a practice in deconstruction, using color to piece apart memories, events, people, and places. The Brighton Press catalog describes the book as such. Framed as a book of color swatches one might find at a paint or interior design shop, where each color name evokes paradisiacal vacations or quaint Americana, California artist Jenny Yoshida Park satirizes aspects of modern American life, such as distraction, societal norms, and the fetishization of the exotic. 107 hand-painted paste paper colors are labeled with names that evoke the vastness and variety of cultural and personal experience, both positive and negative, esoteric and common. Colorized vintage photographs offer a deadpan illustration of the category, creating a false nostalgia for times past, which may not have been as great as we would like to remember. Interrupting the pages is the rough draft of a poem, Because I Love You, I Can Come Apart, by Vermont poet Bianca Stone. Typed on hand-ruled scraps of translucent paper, the lines from the poem interject an intimate, personal voice into the sheen of corporatism. Wild and wandering, Stone's imagery flits from one facet of existence to another, bringing into focus the small and sometimes contradictory moments that add up to a lived life. If you have any questions about the books in this presentation or about any of the books in our collection, feel free to send us an email or check us out on our website, lib.utah.edu/collections/rarebooks. If you liked this virtual lecture, be sure to explore the Rare Books virtual lecture series, with presentations that touch upon a wide variety of different subjects. Here you can find even more digital resources for reference and research. Here you can learn what a book is exactly and what makes a book rare. You can also gain insight to the vast networks of the book's history and explore how early manuscript influenced the design of the book for years to come. Dive deeper into politics, science, and literature, and celebrate the Spanish language with an introduction to Jaconic's artist books. And just when you think you've had enough, learn how to transform your creative writing to make your very own artist book. Once you're done exploring the virtual lectures, head over to the digital exhibitions page. Our digital exhibitions are compiled from past exhibitions that were physically displayed in the Special Collections exhibition gallery on the 4th floor. We're currently working on updating our digital exhibitions, so be sure to check back for more. The curation of each exhibition is centered around a specific topic or theme. For example, our most recent digital exhibition focuses on radical political literature in the 20th century. Lastly, I invite you to subscribe to Open Book, the Marriott Library's official Rare Books blog. Open Book is a great way to explore the breadth and depth of the Rare Books collection. About once a week, we feature a book or books from the collection with a little bit of information. The choices might seem random, but there is a method to the madness, we promise. By exploring Open Book, you'll get to see the vast networks that connect languages, cultures, and periods of history. Plus, you'll be able to impress your friends, family, and even professors with tidbits of knowledge from each post. To subscribe to the blog, enter your email and hit subscribe. To search our archives, click on View All Rare Books Posts.